So this is a really interesting timeline, because you got tickets to Toronto.
Hmm.
You're excited to go. You know that going into it, the meta was going to be set 4, not including set 5. You're ready to sweep the nation with discard. You're going into these set championships for the first half of the month, because with set 4, the championships could have been any weekend in July.
Right.
Um, so for the first 2 weeks, you're prepared to play discard.
Hmm. Been
And then the day
practicing a ton.
came,
Yeah.
yep. And then the day came where Bucky got errated. So for anyone who doesn't know, if you've been able to not face the dark days of Bucky Errata, he became more expensive. So he went up from 2 to 3. He lost ward. He his entire ability of when you play a shift character, your opponent discard, has now become you have to have shifted the character for your opponent to discard. Um, I don't think they touched his strength or willpower.
Yeah. Yeah. His
Okay.
stats are the same. Yeah.
Yeah. So take me through that day. How did you find out about this? What
So
what went through your head?
yeah, I think it was like pretty early in the day that they announced it. And I was just at work and I don't really look at my phone while I was working, but I always
Good for
have it
you.
in my pocket.
Sure.
Yeah, right. And it's just like I was just getting like pinged like a bunch. My phone was just going crazy, and I was like, I just waited until lunch to look at it, and
Yep.
then I was like, holy crap. um,
Yeah.
they actually did it. Yeah, it was definitely a shock for sure because they really hadn't foreshadowed that they were thinking about any balance
Nothing like
changes. I don't
that.
think. Yeah, it kind of just came way out of left field, but um, yeah, it was a shock.
And I think like so when that happened, I saw it and at first I was like, "Oh, like who made this as a joke?"
Yeah.
And then I immediately went to like the Discord and I remember I was like, "This is a joke because I can't find anything." Because I had to scroll so much because everyone was talking about it. And I'm sure people were pinging you because just as when I first saw the Bucky, the first thing I thought of was, my partner Tyler, who same boat as you has been playing discard since set 2.
Yeah.
Um, I was like, I gotta break the news to him. Like I gotta text him. So I'm sure people were also like, poor Adam, like, because I immediately thought about Tyler, and then I was like, oh my gosh, Adam's going to Toronto. Like he already bought his ticket. You're planning to go to this. You're gonna play discard, and then you just get like the rug just gets taken out from under you. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
did you think it was all over? Were you like, that's it? Like discard is dead? Like,
Yeah. I mean, like, I definitely was like very surprised at the fact that, first of all, they errated Bucky because I mean, like, my feelings on erratas are like kind of pretty mixed for physical card games. Like, I kind of understand why, but um, I think the main thing that is like really weird about it is, like you said, that it was active for Toronto, but it's still the same
yeah,
set. So
right,
yeah, just that whole situation of like this is just going to be a meta that no one's played anymore or at all, pretty much,
right.
because you you completely neuter the best deck in the format, and of course the meta is going to be completely different. Uh, but yeah, I did think Emerald Steel was going to suffer a lot without Bucky. Spoiler alert: I am jumping ship for Toronto. I'm not going to be playing Emerald Steel.
Fair.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, could the deck survive without Bucky? It's You could probably make a version that's like reasonably competitive in the current set 4. But I definitely don't think it's going to be like insanely prominent in Toronto.
Right. So errata, for those who don't know, it basically means that the card's text has been changed. So going forward, whether you have a version that is printed without those changes or not, you are to be treated this card as if these new changes have applied. And you had touched on it about with physical card games, you can't put out an update to the servers
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
have all the previous cards are now changed, right? So if you're playing with somebody and you play an old school Bucky and they're like, "Whoa, like what is this?" Like it's totally different. Do you think they should have just banned the poor squirrel? Do you think?
Yeah. I think given that they're planning on releasing the newer version of Bucky anyways, I think it would have just kind of made more sense to just ban him and then just release a nerfed version later.
Right.
Um, because I mean, I don't think they're gonna like turbo out the new printings like anytime soon. At least like in North America and stuff. I know they've planned like releasing it in other countries like that
Right.
haven't gotten it yet. But
Like I think the mainland China print will be the post errata. I would
yeah, the post
assume
errata.
so. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, for the most part, I do kind of agree with the sentiment of just ban him, honestly, because like an errata really it just I think there is probably a non-zero chance that someone could show up to something like Toronto, like being kind of new and just hearing about, oh, there's these like insane, like really competitive events, and they're kind of like
Yeah.
just getting into the game, and they didn't realize, and they bring a deck with Bucky, seeing that he's really good in the set leading up to it.
Yep.
I think you'd have to be living under a rock for that scenario to happen, but it's not impossible.
It's definitely not impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, because I think like if the whole idea was to make discard unplayable, which I don't know if that was like the main attempt. I think discard is still viable. Like what we've talked about earlier in the video is there was definitely a set of discard lists that had no Bucky in it. Like we've seen the change with and without Bucky
Mhm.
before this. Do you think whether it should have been eroded or banned or whatever, do you think it was deserving? Like, do you think the deck was that powerful, or do you think it was just that Bucky itself was too powerful?
Yeah, I think overall, like my thoughts on the deck are pretty much. I think it is probably too centralizing in the current set four meta, just because of like how restricting it is, just because of the fact that only very specific cards can even interact with Bucky.
Yeah.
Um, so if you're not directly interacting with Bucky, you have to essentially go with the game plan of like I have to either a just dump my hand to limit the amount of value that Bucky is getting, or I have to be able to outpace the Bucky discard somehow and keep a buffer so that the cards that are useful in the matchup don't just leave my hand.
Right.
Um, so that's kind of like the three ways that decks have to be built to be viable in this meta is like either you can answer Bucky directly or you have to do one of those two things. The first option, which is dumping your hand, just by nature of most Bucky decks being steel decks, doesn't work that well because then you play into the thing that steel is good at, which is removing your
Pew pew
board.
pew.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So it's kind of more like two options, really. If there was ever a Bucky deck that wasn't steel, maybe an aggro deck could be okay into it. But um, yeah, I think do I think the deck was like too powerful in the set? Because like, is it too restricting versus is it too powerful? It's kind of like a little bit different. I
Yeah.
don't think it's like really, really like broken and like has winning matchups against every deck that's in the meta. Because there are decks that are good at those like kind of two
Yeah.
game plans against Bucky. Um, but I think over centralizing, yes, for sure, because there is definitely decks that in previous sets were pretty good, like things like Emerald Amethyst, or some other ones like Mufasa to an extent. Those kind
Yeah.
of decks just don't really have a good game plan against Bucky, so they've just been completely swept to the wayside. Um, Even though they might be decent against the other decks that aren't Bucky, Bucky was just so common that it just wasn't worth playing them.
Right. If you
Um,
couldn't beat the best, why would you try to beat the rest.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and I think it wouldn't be as big of a problem if Bucky just like hosed like very specific decks, like kind of like going back to set two, what it was like originally kind of trying to do was target Ruby Amethyst. In
Yep,
this set, it still kind of does that, but it's also just like the the curve of like the Diablo synergy that you can do on turn two into like other Floodborns follow up is just powerful enough that it doesn't really matter what deck you're playing against, even if
it's
you're
just
playing against
good.
a bad matchup. If you have that insane early game curve, you can just beat them anyways.
Right.
So it is like it can be like too powerful, I guess, in certain situations if you have the nuts draws. But on a consistent basis, I don't think so. But it's definitely too centralizing. So I do agree with them taking some action from that standpoint because it does open up the meta a lot.
So hypothetically, let's pretend Bucky Errata is going to happen. And instead of the way it happened, where it changed like everything about him, if they had just removed Ward from Bucky, would you still play discard?
If it was only Ward and they didn't do either of the other two changes, yeah, I think Bucky would be still definitely like pretty powerful, particularly
Yeah.
with the like Diablo shift, because that's just something you can do to get immediate value out of the Bucky before the opponent can answer it
Yep.
with something like a Fire the Cannons if it didn't have Ward. Um, I think it would definitely be like a pretty good step in the right direction to making it less powerful. Do I think it would still be too problematic? I think there would be cards that those decks I was talking about before that were kind of just pushed out of the meta because Bucky exists could bring in to deal with Bucky potentially um, if he didn't have Ward. Like one card that comes to mind, for example, in the Amethyst decks that struggled against Bucky, they could potentially use like the 2-drop Pinocchio that like exerts a character. That would
Exactly.
be a
Yep.
good option if he didn't have Ward.
Yeah.
Um, maybe like a Mufasa deck could try something like the 3-drop Sisu that kills a 1 strength character.
Yep.
That would be pretty good. Just a simple brawl also works as well. Um, I think it would probably be reasonably balanced. It's hard to say for sure because it would definitely like still mandate answers in your deck for Bucky because if you're not answering him, then him not having Ward doesn't matter if you don't
Right.
have answers for him anyway. So like the centralizing thing maybe would still be a problem, but I think if you just removed Ward, I think it would probably be like just manageable enough in my opinion. But I could definitely be wrong, and it could
Right.
still just be like you just need too many answers for it in your deck, or else you're just gonna get run over.
And I think like so obviously for a good week, everyone on every platform, it was all just talking about Bucky. And I think a lot of people, like when you looked at it leading up to it, everyone's complaint about Bucky was that you can't do anything against him. Like
Yeah,
realistically, Steel is, I think, like the only thing because it has to be each character. It can't be target character.
yeah,
So grab your swords, great. Tinkerbell, great. Um, but the challenge, even with Steel, was if you have him at Cove, he gets another toughness. So you have to be able to deal damage to him and to get rid of Cove.
mm-hmm.
And I think if you took away Ward, you would be able to answer him. And I want to say just about every color. Like, yeah, sure, there are going to be different workarounds for it, like playing a Pinocchio, exerting, that kind of stuff, to be able to challenge into it. But it's one of those things where like it's hard to say because obviously we don't live in that world. I definitely think I would have wished him to either have been fully banned or have just changed one of those aspects of him. Um, Unfortunately, that's not the case. Our
Yeah,
poor squirrel is dead.
yeah. And I do think like if they were super like invested in the errata route, I think it's like understandable that they went so heavy-handed on the nerf because like it would be pretty embarrassing to just be like, "Oh, sorry guys, we didn't nerf him enough. We have to nerf him
Do it
again."
again.
Yeah,
Right.
so it kind of makes sense, but then we go back to the other argument of like I think no designer was looking at the post errated Bucky and be like, "Yeah, this is still a competitively viable card." I think like
Yeah.
I could be wrong, and they were like, "Yeah, I think this is like," but it feels like to me with the triple nerf that they were more so going for a route of like, "I want this card to suck, so it's not played." But
That's how it feels, right? Like it definitely feels like it is targeted to the point where it's like, okay, no, like you can't play him.
yeah,
Which
like
goes back to the then why didn't you just ban him? But I mean we could go on about like semantics about that all day long, right? And I think the one thing so far that I've really loved about Lorcana and about like Ravensburger's handling of the whole game, it's only a year in. It is still a brand new game. I mean, if you look at the big forefathers, if you will, of TCGs, if you look at Magic and Pokemon, if you look at their first year, wow, it was rough. Like mistakes were made, things happen,
yeah,
you know.
like the first set of Magic, like wasn't there like that one mana draw three cards? That's just like it was just like a print run or like what's it called? Like them when they have like a similar card that's in every color.
A
That
cycle,
was
yeah.
just like yeah, like a cycle. Yeah, that was
Yeah.
just like well, this game's three of something,
Yeah,
so they're all the same, right? They're all kind of evenly
totally the same.
balanced. Yeah, but
Except for
no,
if it's blue. Blue always gets the best stuff, but
Blue does get the best stuff. You're right.
I think that like you can look at the forefathers and you can learn from these mistakes too, right? And I
For sure.
think that, you know, when you look at, and the first thing that comes to my mind is when they first released Chapter 1 booster boxes and they had like that rip strip at the back of them to try to do like the anti theft. And people are like, actually, you can still get around it. And they had to put like the plastic seals. Like they seem to respond to community feedback pretty well and
Yeah.
pretty quickly. And I think that whether you agree or disagree, whether you think this was the worst mistake ever, I think the voices have been heard. And I think that we can ensure that going forward, they're going to always try to do the best they can. I
hmm
would like to hope because there's a lot of passion in this game and there's a lot of hope and longevity in it. And I think that when you look at it, you have to understand that you're never going to make everyone happy. If you had just outright banned him, you're still going to make people upset because they want to play discard.
Yeah.
If you didn't do anything with it, you know, people are going to say like, "Oh, we don't have an answer to this. Like this is so unfair." So I think the real conversation about the Bucky Errata is less of the did they do it good or not, but just how do we move forward from it? How do we learn from mistakes if it's a mistake? And what is the future of like bans and erratas? Because I think when we go to see competitive play, although nothing has really been announced yet, I think we're going to see, you know, rotation happen when a set comes out because so many new sets are in. And I think we're going to see, you know, maybe like reprints. And that's all stuff that you might assume is in it coming from magical Pokemon, where things like that do happen. But if this is your first TCG and you're coming into this, you may not know what to expect. And I think them handling it safer or softer, if that makes sense, knowing that this is people's first, I don't think is a bad choice. But that's just my 2 cents on the whole topic.
Yeah. I would agree overall. I think the route they went was like trying to like kind of like you said, they were trying to just take like a neutral-ish stance of like if Timmy just really likes Emperor's New Groove and wants to play Bucket as local,
Yeah,
he can still do
he can
that.
still play Bucky, right?
Like it's still allowed, but
Yeah.
it essentially fixes the competitive problem. But
Now, with the ability that you have to have shifted the shift character for an opponent to draw or to have to discard, do you think Morph can come back? because now you can play
You can,
all the shift characters without the
yeah,
targets.
more fun to yeah, go like Diablo on 1, more fun 2, Bucky on 3, pray that your opponent doesn't kill it because it doesn't have ward anymore.
I mean, but
And then
still, like,
shift Diablo right away on turn 3, and then shift
yeah,
something onto Morph afterwards. You've gotten 2 triggers, so the Bucky is paid for itself.
I'm just saying.
Um, Maybe it could
I'm on
be.
Team Morph.
I love Morph. Yeah, I just wish he wasn't a 2-1.
Yeah.
I think if they flipped that power and or strength, excuse me, and willpower around, so he didn't at
Hmm.
least die to the one ping stuff, that would make a world of difference. But yeah.
Yeah. I think a lot of like the lower cost stuff, because I mean, you have like Madame Medusa that just is like, oh, you have three or less, get out of here. You have like Sisu on ice decks, right? Where I think that, we used to look so much at just like the strength of it. No, sorry, the willpower of it. But now we're having things that target creatures, wow, characters due to their strength. Wow, this is hard to translate sometimes. All right, well, Bucky's eroded. We're moving on. You even said that you have now switched gears
I've jumped ship. Yeah.
because you had to make a choice. So this happened. Let's go back to this. This happened middle of July.
Mm-hmm.
This is in the middle of set championships. You theoretically have 2 weeks left of set championships. You now have a choice. Do you continue playing Bucky discard to go into set championships because it's still strong and it's still legal in set championships? Or do you jump ship now because you're going to Toronto and you want to practice, knowing that the practice you're going to get isn't actually like all that realistic because people are still going to be playing Bucky discard? So talk us through, what did you do?
Yeah. So it was just how the timeline lined up. It was basically announced after I'd already done the first store championships
Yep.
locally, and it was like the week before the second one that I was going to. Um, I had kind of just made the decision after I saw that I would still play Bucky at the next one just because it was only like a few days before, and I was like, well, if I don't even really have all the cards for another competitive deck,
Right.
so I would have to do that, like get all that together, and then try and practice with it as well, which I think like fundamentally I'm like a pretty decent player, but picking up a deck that I've never played and going to set champs wasn't ideal.
I don't
Or
think it ever is
uh,
ideal, but
yeah, definitely
yeah.
wouldn't have been ideal. So I was just kind of like, let me just see how it goes with Bucky for one. And if I do really well with Bucky, then I don't feel as bad about practicing another deck at the last one that I was planning on going to. And given that I ended up winning with Bucky, at that point I was like, okay, I've done kind of what I wanted to do with these store champs. Um, I thought it was kind of better just to, at that point, look forward to Toronto, given that the one other store championships that I was planning on going to was the only real serious event that was left with Bucky still
Right.
as he was. So I was like, it's just one tournament. Let me see how I do in the last one with something else. And I ended up deciding on Amber Steel because uh, it still has like a lot of the steel elements that I
Hmm.
like coming from Magic, where like generally like the spot removal in Magic is so much more efficient than it is in this game, which I really like. I mean, sometimes it's just kind of a necessity in a card game. It feels like that your opponent plays a big threat and you have to kill it efficiently. Um, Amber Steel kind of lets you have some of that vibe
Yeah.
with the singers. So that was like the main thing that drew me to it. And I've been liking it a lot, for sure. Would I say I like it more than Bucky? I might honestly. I think
Really?
it's maybe more my play style. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
I find that so interesting because, I mean, like I've known you for almost a year at this point because we've played locals together.
yeah.
Um, and I've really only known you to play discard.
Yeah.
So And I knew that in the last set champs, you played Steal a Song. And when you had first come on the beginning of this video and you had said that you started with Steal a Song,
Yeah, we've come full circle.
that is,
Yeah,
I
love it.
love that so much
Yeah,
that you went back to what you started with and that you almost enjoy it better. I don't know. I just find that so,
yeah. I mean, maybe to an extent, it's just because it's something different than I was playing for so long.
yeah,
Um, but at least for now, like I do kind of like because I do generally prefer decks that have like a little bit more of a ceiling, and like I mean, people might have their own opinions on this. I don't personally feel like the Bucky deck was particularly difficult to play. You just kind of like if you have a Bucky, you mulligan, you play it. If you don't have it, you mulligan really
yeah,
hard for it, and then
yeah.
from there you just want to play
Play
Floodborns and attack
Floodborns.
the opponent's hand and kill their threats. Amber Steel's like a little bit more decision making,
Yeah.
which I I like. I like games where I have to use my brain a little bit more. Not that I'm saying that like Bucky is like a
No,
skillless deck or anything like that, but
yeah. But I think that's a really good point too, is because I'm in the same boat. Like even when I've played Magic for years, and I never really liked aggro because in my mind, and again, I love aggro players, nothing wrong against you, but it's kind of just like play all your creatures turn sideways or
yeah.
quest, and then that's it. Where which I really like Steel for, it's kind of like a what do I need now? Do I need an answer? What kind of answer do I need? And you're constantly thinking about all the options you have.
Hmm. Yeah.
So so you took Steel Song, you said, to the third set championships. And that was the one that was last weekend for this
Yeah.
video? Yeah.
Yeah. It was last weekend.
So how did that go?
So yeah, so we started off. It was 2 game format for Swiss,
Yep.
and it was 5 rounds.
It was, yeah.
And I mean, I hadn't played too much Ember Steel this set yet. It had basically just been like a week and a half or so worth of like practicing with just like friends locally. Um, the first round I went 1-1 against Blue Steel, which is like one of the harder matchups. So I was just kind of like, okay, first game in, like playing in a serious tournament with a new deck. I was kind of just happy to take 1-1 in a harder matchup.
Yep.
And then my next set, I got 2-0'd by one of our locals that was playing Amber Emerald, which was like a little bit disheartening. I was just like, is this how it ends for me for the set champs? I'm just getting 2-0'd by Lemon Lime.
I
And
don't I
just
don't even remember someone was there playing Lemon Lime.
yeah, it was Josh. Yeah,
Oh, that's right.
yeah,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay. I totally
yeah,
forgot. Yeah.
yeah. So that was yeah, that was fun. That was a fun experience getting 2-0'd by a fairly off meta deck.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, it was like well played by him. I didn't draw amazing, but I definitely made like a lot of like pretty clear misplays thinking about it afterward. But I was a little bit like disheartened after that round.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
I did manage to like get pretty lucky matchup wise because I was playing like a pretty aggressive flute variant. And the next 3 rounds of Swiss, I got matched up against Ruby Amethyst in all 3 rounds.
Oh, that's
Which
so
yeah,
lucky.
yeah,
Well,
it
I
was
get. Yeah.
pretty lucky. Definitely like one of the at least of the decks that were really meta like um this set. That was definitely like with the version I was playing, it was one of the decks I was happier to see.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've sat down knowing that I probably had to 2 everyone from that point with only five
Right.
rounds. And I did end up getting there with all 2-0s for the last 3 rounds. So and then yeah, so I ended up making top 8 because of that. And then I played against another Ruby Amethyst and 2-0'd the first round, which got me
Nice.
the Ursula. And
Yep.
then I played against another Ruby Amethyst, and then the win streak against Ruby Amethyst ended, unfortunately, to a pretty good Ruby Amethyst player. Um, but yeah, so I still ended up getting a pretty solid top 4 with the deck that I'm not the most familiar with yet. But
Right.
um, yeah, it was a fun experience for sure. Definitely a good change of pace.
Would you say that you're proud at how you did, knowing that it is basically a new deck, knowing that you didn't probably get a lot of practice with it?
Yeah, I would say I was definitely pretty proud of it. I mean, a lot of the things that you want to do against a lot of the meta decks, you might be doing it a little bit differently depending on the deck you're playing. But the at least where um, like Ruby Amethyst is kind of doing a similar-ish thing against most decks. It's not
Yeah.
like a completely different game picking up something else
Right.
against it or against most of the other meta decks. So it's not like I was playing from like square zero where I just had like no knowledge of anything. But
Right. You
yeah,
still had like matchup knowledge. You still knew what like
mhm.
the other decks were. You weren't, it's not like you were
Yeah,
picking up the game brand new. You were just picking a new
yeah.
deck. So
And another thing is I think about the game way too much, just in my spare time. Like I just spend way too much time thinking about like, okay, what in this like random meta matchup, what would like this side want to do and what would this side want to do?
you
Like
could
it's
just
just
play scenarios in your head.
yeah, I'm in too deep. I'm in too deep for
So
sure.
that
I do.
actually brings us, I mean, hey, there's not, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. You know, people are allowed to have passions, Adam. You're allowed to be full hearted into this.
I'm
Um
definitely there. Yeah, I'm into Lorcana. What can I say?
Yay. But that actually does bring us into a good point of, you're going to Toronto. Like,
I am. Yeah.
you're going to one of the bigger tournaments that we see for Lorcana, aside from like their version of Worlds you have to get invited to. Um, how do you prepare for that? Like, what do you do?
Yeah, it's definitely like I mean normally it would just be like well I just sit down and practice against other people and stuff like that, but where it's such a weird situation of like who really knows what the meta is going to look like exactly because of the whole Bucky thing. Um, it's it's pretty difficult. I think it would definitely be a situation where having a certain online platform existing would be pretty helpful because I
Yeah.
could just hit up other people and say like I think this deck is going to be pretty common in Toronto because it can make like these changes now that Bucky doesn't exist anymore. Can you play it against me? That's a little bit
Right.
harder to do with like local and I mean we don't live in an insanely big scene. There's a good amount of people that play pretty actively. So like there are definitely like I have some people locally that I play with occasionally and hopefully leading up to the tournament we can like pull together cards and be like I think
Hmm.
like kind of like I said like this like kind of theorize like maybe Ruby Amethyst will make these changes without Bucky in it and then
Right.
hopefully try and play test against those decks with the changes that we maybe expect a little bit. um yeah, I guess for the most part it's just kind of like a bit of a like theory crafting kind of situation where you just kind of have to like do your best with the knowledge of like what are these decks like about Bucky being gone and what were they not using before maybe that they can now bring in and like think about that. And also just like playing in general, like just with
Yeah.
locals.
And that's so hard because technically the Bucky Errata doesn't actually take place until, as of we're filming this, next Friday. So actually as
Yeah.
of the 9th, when fifth set releases to local game stores.
Hmm.
So if you go to league nights, there are still people there who would or could be playing the Bucky matchups.
Hmm.
Um, and
Yeah.
then you have to think, like you said, it's a lot of theater crafting. So, for example, okay, Bucky's out. We're taking a lot of assumptions to that. So we're assuming that discard is out. And if discard's out, what were the decks that were in the meta purposely to challenge discard? Does that mean that
Hmm.
they're coming out? Does that mean that they're switching? Is Ruby Amethyst going to be 60% of the meta again? Because I'd be okay if it wasn't. Right? Like, brawls. I'm sure brawls is still useful, but what else is there now for this gap? It's created this power sink, right? Like it was at the top ish. You've moved it. What's gonna funnel in there now? So,
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
what are you expecting to see at the top?
I think, I mean, the easy answer is like Ruby Amethyst is probably going to be number one,
Yeah.
which I think there are still decks that can like challenge it that aren't Bucky. Bucky was, I think, like pretty clear cut its worst matchup. So it's hard to see a world where Ruby Amethyst doesn't go better when you just or perform better when you just remove its worst matchup.
Yep.
Um, but I think there are like a lot of decks that might have been good against Ruby Amethyst, but were bad against Bucky that do better.
Yeah.
Like one example is like Mufasa was generally pretty
Absolutely.
solid against Ruby Amethyst, just because you have like Mufasa, which is just like one of the best like kind of anti be prepared cards out there, and
Yeah.
uh, like by virtue of playing a Ruby deck, you have good options to deal with Queen's Castle. Like maybe you could play Mufasa with stuff like the Hercules or the Maui
Yep.
um, to get in there, and they're just like going like you can just go really wide with Mufasa, which the answer to that is generally be prepared. But if you be prepared to Mufasa, they
You
get a
get a
follow up
trigger.
out of at least some compensation.
Yeah.
But Mufasa was just horrible into Bucky because you just don't have enough card draw and you're playing a
No.
character heavy deck against Steel. So
You're gonna
I think
get
Mufasa is
be
one thing that
prepared.
could come back.
Yeah.
Um, some other ones are like Emerald Amethyst, I think would definitely get a lot better. Do I think they're going to be like better meta contenders than like the other decks like Sapphire Steel, like Sapphire Ruby, like Amber Steel? I think probably the Sapphire decks might not do particularly well. I could be wrong, but I think kind of like you said, like Sapphire Steel, I think was one of the ones that was trying to target Bucky a lot more.
Yeah.
Um, and it's just not amazing into Ruby Amethyst. So it's
It's
hard to see a
really
world
not.
where it does amazing in Toronto.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, a good Sapphire Steel player can still win, like even with the bad matchups, just
Oh, of
because
course.
yeah, the deck's so explosive that even against Ruby Amethyst, if you survive the early game, you can just win it of nowhere with like Tamato a dime in like 2 turns.
Yeah.
But
I mean, it's a combo deck. It's meant to just, oops, I win, right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the good pilots will still do well with the Sapphire decks. It just depends on if they're crazy enough to do it into a meta where Ruby Amethyst is like the clear like deck to beat. Um, I think. Some other decks that I think could maybe do better are like kind of the more aggro decks. Like I don't know, maybe some hyper aggro will get in there with Bucky being less of a thing, and the
Yeah.
other steel decks are not super happy to face Ruby Amethyst. Um, I think generally, but my pick still is probably the Amber Steel. That's what I'm going with generally, just because I think with that thought of like the aggro decks get better,
Yep.
Ruby Amethyst probably gets better. I think a deck that can kind of like have the gas against Ruby Amethyst and deal with the aggro decks, I think is going to be a good pick.
And
Um,
Amber Steel is pretty nice. Like you still have like the Steel Grabusaur, which is the
mhm.
board wipe
Yeah,
for the aggro decks that you need. And I mean, against like Ruby Amethyst, like you have enough low cost characters that you can be playing out to a turn so you don't get Lady Tremaine or reduce it or
exactly. Yeah,
just like removed there that way. So
yeah,
yeah, I really like Amber Steel. I played that in the last two set championships that I did. Just because I really don't like Sapphire Steel anymore. It's too slow to me.
yeah,
And it's so like I didn't mind playing against discard because I can just outdraw whatever they make me discard, but it still is just so slow.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah. I definitely like. that's that sweet spot to me. Is I like a
Mhm.
deck that's like a bit faster, but still just doesn't completely fold if the opponent plays a big character. And like, well, I can't
Exactly.
quest into this. What do I do? But
And having like double questers, like, love the harps, love them.
the
Uh,
harps, it's such a like an interesting development because
yep,
there was a lot of people I think that were saying at the beginning of set four that that card was just
it
like
was the
one of the
worst
worst cards
card.
ever printed.
Yeah,
Like because oh, one drop that you
absolutely.
can't play on turn one, it must be bad. But
But like, it's
um,
not.
yeah, it's really
Yeah,
good. Yeah, yeah, it's just because I mean the deck just wants to dump like Amber Steel just wants to dump its hand fast and then whole new world. So
absolutely.
Harp is just perfect for that.
And I
Uh,
found that like when I was playing it, like, I've got like a little like small like test group, which actually shout out to Connor. He's the one I got the list from.
yeah,
I don't know if you got the list from it, but
yeah,
his
we,
list.
we've compared notes. We've
Okay, I
compared.
was gonna say because his list has definitely been making rounds at locals, but
Yeah,
um,
it's got on for sure.
when we were doing like deck testing, it was mentioned that the harps are there, um, and there's going to be some magic lingo coming out here, but the harps state that if you didn't play a song this turn, banish this character at the end of the turn. So what that means is that character's trigger, um, it checks if you've played a song at the end of the turn,
Mhm.
which means that that character doesn't have to be out on the field when you played the song.
Right.
It just checks at the end. So if you were to, I don't know, a whole new world and then
And
drop two harps, they're still there. And you
yeah,
just drew seven new cards, you're gonna draw a harp. And then by the next turn comes along, you have seven new cards in your hand, you're going to draw another card. And it's kind of in there for like that mid game to like really like close out the gap, right? Like
mhm.
Amethyst has their castles to close out the gaps. We have our harps.
Yeah. It's
Like,
just so crazy. Yeah, because I mean, after you do a whole new world, if you have to spend three cards to get that much questing power on the board,
go for it.
you don't really care because you just drew seven.
Yeah.
So like, just yeah, I'll dump my three harps, three ink, quest for six, basically. Like,
And with steel, you have to remember like you have 5-drop singers. So in an ideal world, you're not actually spending ink to play a whole new world. You're
mhm.
using a Robin, you're using an Ariel or a Gaston who can sing those higher songs. So
Yeah,
I think I really have been enjoying um Amber Steel. I love Steel. I'm on the Steel like hype train like all the
I
way.
I don't know if I could play a deck that doesn't have steel in it.
I tried. I
Um,
hated it.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's
So,
that's the problem. Is I just don't have ruby cards really,
yeah,
and I don't really want to play an aggro deck, so that just means I'm playing steel.
great. Played Steel. And like
We're
I
playing
think
steel.
that's really nice too is there's a it's not the same like Steel cards, but there is definitely a crossover of what you had in discard for
Yeah,
your Steel options, what you have in Amber Steel. So it's not like you had to go out and buy a whole new meta deck. Like
yeah,
you could
for sure.
use some of them there. So so yeah, because Toronto is in
Like
less than a month,
3 weeks.
3 weeks. Nope, yeah, it's in about 3 weeks. Wow. So you're looking to get, like you said, play testing in.
Mhm.
Um, do you have any decks kind of like in mind that you're like, oh, I really need to like grind against that deck because I feel like that's the one that you're not comfortable with, or like is it really strong against like Amber Steel that you're playing? Is there any decks that you're just like the bane of your existence right now?
Yeah, I think the main ones are like kind of the ones I alluded to earlier that have not really been prominent but might get better. Like
Yeah.
people might be more inclined to bring them in like a less Emerald Steel heavy meta. Um, because I mean I can't tell you the last time I played against a Mufasa deck. I mean it's a lot of characters, so it's
Yeah.
like not the most complicated deck ever, but I would definitely like be pretty interested to hear like some thoughts on people who are more used to playing that deck to hear their thoughts on like what text do they think could be brought in, like now that Bucky's not around
Hmm.
to deal with the other decks that are going to be more popular in Toronto, and play against that. But with like the kind of limited time left, who knows how much of
Yeah.
that is going to actually happen. And we do have like a few local players who do like kind of who were kind of on those more like niche decks,
Yep.
that would probably have some thoughts on that. So I'll hopefully get to um, get like a bit of theory crafting going and testing with those players. But
Yeah. And you had touched on very briefly for a little bit. Um, and I don't see why we can't talk about it, but Pixelborn was an unofficial online client that a couple of people, I don't even know how many people, but like it's an online client that essentially allowed you to have a matchmaking system to play Lorcana online. Um, Unofficial. I do need to state that, but it has been taken down. And so now when you're looking at deck testing, if you want to get like real hands-on, like not just like the theory craft that we talked about, but like real hands-on deck testing, you've got to meet up with people, which means scheduling conflicts, which I don't know about you, but that is a pain to try and
we're all
deal.
adults.
Yep.
It is
It
difficult.
it's hard, yeah. Um you also have to have all the cards or proxy them if you don't. And I
Yeah,
think that's another big challenge because you're constantly making switches or edits or like what if based on what cards you have. Um or the other thing too is people have been doing like web camera games, which not against it, definitely kind of a janky setup from because I used to do it with Magic. I'm sure there are better setups out there. I know people have been using like Tabletop Simulator. I don't know how janky that is or how much of a learning curve that is, but like it's possible, but it's just not as easy. So the the ability to be able to hands-on play test is limited, really. Like I think
yeah,
for most people. So you're having a deck, you have some practice with it, you're theory crafting with it, and you're trying to get hands-on practice when you can. And I mean, I think Toronto is going to be, I don't want to say it's going to be a wash, but I think if we look back from years on, it's going to be one of those tournaments that stand out as a like the results from it don't matter.
yeah.
Like
I
it
think
doesn't
people.
tell us anything.
Yeah, I think it will be kind of like an interesting look at like what could the meta have looked like if they did
What
something about
if?
Bucky earlier.
Right.
Um, but I also think like kind of what you were talking about with not being able to play test as much without something like Pixelborn or another online client. I think that could maybe make the meta a little bit more like focused on just like the decks people are just more used to.
Oh,
Because
absolutely.
do you really want to take a risk if you're someone who doesn't have like a lot of playtesting resources
Right.
available and play this deck that you think might be good in kind of an unknown field? Or do you just want to play Ruby Amethyst or whatever that you know is going to be good? There might be the people that like successfully, kind of win in the deck builder and find something that manages to target it really effectively, that you lose to, but it's just kind of the safer option if you don't have those resources. So,
And like the pressure, like so I tried to get tickets to Toronto. I wanted to go so bad. Didn't get
yeah,
lucky to get them. But
that's
I went to
unfortunate.
Atlanta and like I don't know anyone who's like I've been to every DLC or I have all this money to spend on hotels and flights, but like you're it's a big challenge and you're putting a lot on the line. Like I don't want to, like scare people, but like I don't want to just pick up a random deck and be like, this looks cool and just walk in because you're locked into it, right? I'm like, yeah,
Yeah,
like there are other side events, but like I want to give it my all, right? Like I want to go in there with something that I'm comfortable with, that I'm, you know, competent at playing and just have fun at the same time, but still give
mhm,
it a good shot. So
yeah,
I think yeah, people are definitely going to go back to their comfort zones with it. And I think looking back at what was set 3 meta like? And I think that might be really interesting, is going back to those set 3 decks, like you talked about Mufasa, and just seeing what can we add into it from set 4 without having to worry about Bucky and discard.
Yeah,
Because
for sure.
I do think Mufasa is very viable right now. I mean, there are some great Amber cards. There are some great aggro cards. Uh, Flynn, I think Flynn Frenemy could even be in addition to a Mufasa deck, depending on which route you're going to go with it, right? So I think it would be really interesting to see. I'm kind of disappointed that I didn't get to go because I want to see the decks. Like I want to see what people are thinking for this, right? So
Yeah, yeah,
we'll have to you have to keep me posted on that, and maybe we'll have to have a conversation afterwards about
for
what was
sure.
it
Yeah.
like, right? Because it's gonna be this really weird like fever dream, I think.
Yeah. Especially because it's just right at the start of like the next set, and like
Yeah,
I'm probably gonna be going to like some of the pre-releases and stuff and playing with the new cards, and then
right.
just have to like go back in time basically to like something that didn't even fully exist, basically like a meta that didn't even
Right,
really
like
develop. So
I, f- I feel like it's like when you watch like Marvel movies, like you split the time stream, right? Like,
yeah,
and it feels so weird because like when I was preparing for Atlanta, like it was a very similar boat to Toronto, where it was like technically a week before global release for the set, but like you still had like the LGS releases. I wasn't looking at any set 4 cards because I'm like, all I want to think about is set 3. I don't want to think about, oh crap, like Diablo, because that was the biggest thing, like coming out of set 4, because I was playing Jafar and it was like, oh, if I Jafar and they have Diablo exerted, like we're done for. But like I didn't want to have to think about that. And so it's interesting though, because you're in a boat where like I think you can afford to think about set 5 because it's there and the meta in Toronto doesn't really matter.
yeah, yeah. It's yeah. It'll be a bit weird, I think, to not have to like just kind of wipe those cards from
Yeah,
memory, pretty much. Like it just, but I mean, it's not too dissimilar from like playing different formats in like Magic or something like that.
right. Oh,
Yeah,
exactly.
you just have to go. Okay, these cards are the ones that are the best. I have to think about those options.
And if you do any of like the side events, the set 5 will be legal for the
True.
side events too
Yeah.
there. So not saying that you're not going to day 2, just saying if you play the side events. um
Yeah.
but
Could
yeah, I guess like I mean as far as Toronto goes, we'll just kind of wait and see. So what happens? I mean, like you said, you can only theory craft and deck test so much until you know what everyone else is thinking. So
Yeah, like I do wonder how like large a proportion of the people who like are going to be there who are the grinders like for this specific event,
right,
and like I don't know, maybe they have their own like little secret cult Discord chat that they're like playing table test simulator like for the 3 weeks leading up to the event or whatever. And just like figuring out what the whole meta like might look like or something.
could,
That
yeah,
maybe there might be some hidden group that's doing that and they're going to get all the top spots.
and like
Who
look at this
knows? But
fringe deck, right? Like,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. No, I think it is going to be super interesting to see what happens. So
yeah. Like as
yeah,
much as like it would have been nice to just play Bucky for the whole set, get really proficient with
yeah.
it, and then take it to Toronto. This is kind of also an interesting content that
Oh,
like
it's so
is fun
I
and
like
cool in its
Julia
own way.
timeline.
So
Yeah, and I think like I'm glad that you're in good spirits about it because I know like the dark day happened and it was hard. Like there were definitely some people who had strong emotions that day and that week, like and um I'm glad that like you are someone who you're recovering from this, and I think whether you are a casual or a competitive player or want to be one or the other, I think at the end of the day, like you just have to say, cool, this happened. How do we move on from this, right? All right. Well, I think we've covered, like a lot here. In general, I mean, this is the first year of Lorcana. I mean, I know you said you started like set 2, but really like for most of us, this is the first year fully that we've all played. I take it that you're still in it for the long road, like looking forward to the next year of Lorcana, you're still
Yeah, I
pretty
mean,
hyped to be here?
I think as long as the game is just like still like bringing new and interesting ideas, I think it'll survive. I mean, it's built off the back of one of the biggest, kind of franchise, well,
Yeah,
multi franchise, kind of companies that it could be. So I
yeah,
think it has a lot going for it. Um, I think like the way the game is designed, there's definitely like a lot of just things that are kind of underexplored a bit that they could just keep adding to the game, just to present new ideas. Yeah, I think the future of the game definitely it looks pretty good. I'm definitely gonna keep playing it until I don't
till
know
it's not.
until I stop. Is a good way to put it.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people I think have the idea of like a 2 year kind of test that like card games have to go through. Like I've heard
yeah.
that a bit. Like if it survives for 2 years, then it's probably doing pretty well. Um,
So
I
what you're
don't know.
saying is I should,
There's no real science behind that, but it's just kind of
yeah.
like
So we should schedule this conversation a year from now and
yeah, a year
revisit.
from now, is Lorcana dead? Have the whole all caps title.
Yeah, yeah. In this time stream of it, Bucky is still alive.
Yeah.
Bucky returns. Um,
The-
that
we
needs to
have
be
a
a
new
set.
hope
I need
and
a
the
Bucky
returning
return
of
set.
Bucky.
um, awesome. I mean, the only really thing I have else to say is just like best of luck, right? Like you're going to Toronto. That's insane. And just as like a side note, like if you need any help playtesting, I'm available now. And I know that we've got some pretty great guys in the locals scene too that will be happy to help support you and everyone else going to Toronto because I just want to see more Atlanta, Canada people up there on the big stage and taking it home. Go
Yeah,
get one
for
of those
sure.
like golden Mickeys.
Yeah, the golden Mickey's. Yeah, I hope so. I mean,
Yeah,
it's a hard game. There's a lot of competition, but I definitely
yeah,
think I'm like, maybe there's a day where I'm drawing well enough that I can make
yeah.
something happen. But yeah,
Just, I
it's
mean,
it's
you've
gonna be rough.
had two top eights now. We've gone into top four, so you're
Yeah,
on a pretty good start of a pretty good streak. So we'll keep cheering you on for sure from here, and we'll keep coverage on Toronto for sure. So
yeah. I'm definitely looking forward to it. Kind of getting a bit of a spirit bomb from the Atlantic Canada people because I mean it's unfortunate that like there's a lot of people that wanted to go that just couldn't get tickets and I was one of the lucky ones that could. So I feel pretty fortunate in that sense to have that kind of support, but also like in a sense it is like a bit of pressure because it's
right.
like I want to perform better, so you know kind of do it for the people who couldn't go, but
Well, I have faith, trust, and pixie dust in you, and even if even if Bucky can't be with you, we will all be with you.
aw, yeah,
Yeah.
thanks.
So, but thank you so much for joining us and for coming on and talking about your Bucky adventure. And yeah, really really nice actually to have you on.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. We will see you in Toronto and best of luck.